All right, g'day, hi, and welcome. Today we're going to talk about the big boy guitars. See what I did there? Okay, so what you're looking at here is my SVN 7 Mark Holcomb PRS SE model guitar, and my LTD ESP LTD EC258 8-string guitar. These are what I call big boy guitars. Why do I call them big boy guitars? Well, scale length is the main thing, and the fact that you got extra strings on them. These guitars, if you're thinking about getting into 7 strings and 8 strings, and I got to tell you right now, okay, my favorite guitar of all time is my SG61 reissue sitting over there. It's the benchmark guitar that I judge all other guitars against. Basically, how does it compare into that, in comparison to that guitar? And I love the 24 3/4 scale of the Gibson. It's so easy to play. If you have small hands, I don't. I got big monkey fingers, whatever. The 24 3/4 scale guitars are really, really nice to play. Billy Gibbons from ZZ Top, I think, summed it up best. They asked him, why'd you like the Gibson scale so much, like with his Les Pauls? He goes, why work harder than you have to? And that we're going to talk about. So if you are thinking of getting into a 7-string guitar, 8-string guitar, and you're not sure if that's going to be the way you want to go, but maybe you're going to do something like I did. Technically, right now, these are both 7-string guitars because I got to change. I got a broken string here. I am going to change those strings. I got to get around to it. Maybe I should do that today. I don't know. It's been broken for a couple of months now. I just haven't gotten around to it. I haven't been playing my 8-string enough lately. But the 7-string, I play it pretty much daily. I love this guitar so much. But you have to work harder to play these extended scale lengths. So these are both 26.5. Now, I have played up to a Jackson fan fret 7-string that had a 27-inch scale length. It was cool, but more work. Why? Longer scale length. So the fan fret made, well, on the lower end anyway, the fan fret made it a little bit more effort. I don't want to say harder to play because the guitars are not necessarily harder to play. They're more effort. If you're using heavier string gauges, which you usually are on a 7-string, if you have an extended range like 26.5 and up, you're probably going to be playing 10 gauge and up, maybe even heavier gauge strings. And we're going to talk about string gauges in a little bit, but when I made the decision in 2019 that I wanted to get some modern metal sounds, I wanted, the Kongzilla sound that I grown to love with my Mesa Boogie cabinet with the 6-string guitars, but I wanted something that just had a natural baritone kind of sound to it. And I ended up buying the 8-string before I bought the 7-string. And it took me a good 6 months before I could play the 8-string without just constantly misfretting, like, for example, go to hit an E flat chord and you end up hitting the A minor chord and stuff like that, and go for the A minor chord and you hit something even weird, and try to hit a D minor was just like in the first position, just kind of threw you for a bit of a whirl, right? But you eventually get used to these wider necks. So I found I had more of an issue with the width of the neck than I did with the scale length of the neck. But then again, my hands are, big enough that it's not that much of an issue. But I definitely did notice it. So if you're playing a Gibson, your fingers are probably going to be like that together on average. If you're playing, so that's 24 3/4 scale. But let's say you're playing a Fender scale, 25.5. Your fingers are probably going to be like that. 26.5, you're like this. Anything wider, you're going to be like this, right? And when you have to make extra conscious effort to widen out your fingers, it's more tiring because you have to actually get used to holding your fingers out like that rather than just let them naturally fall into place like on a shorter scale guitar. So that's something that people don't understand right away. And that's why a lot of people, like, they'll buy an 8-string and then it just sits there and sits there and sits there and they never use it. I don't see myself getting rid of this 8-string anytime soon. I'm not saying I never would, but there is other issues with the 8-string, such as tension issues, that just keeps it from being that perfect playing guitar, right? But the 7 string, I just fell in love with that from right away. I got used to that after a couple of weeks, and I'm not saying I can play it blindfolded like I can my SGs, but almost. This is vastly becoming one of my favorite guitars to play. I've only used it live once in a kind of like an acoustic kind of setting. I can't wait to try the 8 string live. But I can't wait to really, put the pedal to the metal with these things in a band context live. I think that's where I'm getting hooked on that baritone sound. So even if my leads, they don't necessarily suffer from the longer scales, but I have to work a lot harder for the leads. Not insanely harder, but if you want to do sweep picking and stuff like that, it's kind of like playing with the 8 string. I find it, because of the way the tension is on that guitar, it's kind of like trying to do leads on a really, really nice acoustic where you can get away with it, but you really got to work for it. Where on the 7 string, it's a little bit more of a flow, a little more natural, and it's kind of doing its thing, right? There we go. Oop. Don't know what was going on there, but bottom line, 7 string, if you go into a store and you try them out, what I would recommend is try them out, right? If you could rent one, if you weren't sure, rent one for a little while, play nothing but it. Because what happens is we get the experience of novelty, right? Where we buy something and it's all new and whatever. And as soon as we play it for a little bit, like with the 8 string, you get one in your hand for the first time, you kind of don't know what to do with it. You're not just going to play your regular AC/DC stuff with it. It just doesn't seem to bring it naturally out. It seems like you forget everything you know how to play and have to relearn again. It's a weird experience. Like if you really, it's just because your fingers you're a bit confused by those 2 extra strings, and so your eyeballs, your hand-eye coordination is kind of thrown off a bit. So you just don't know what to play with it, right? But what I would say is that you have to live with it for a little while, and you kind of have to force yourself to get used to playing them. The 7 string, I think, is really as far as a guitar can go, strings wise, and scale length wise, to still call it a guitar. The 8 string, there's guys that really, really love them, but there's a reason why they're not as big. I thought the 8 string was going to be something that, okay, once you get used to it, you're good, right? But it never really is. It's always extra work to play it. And that, I think, would turn off a lot of guitar players. So a lot of guys get, they love their 7 strings, regardless of the scale length. But when they come to the 8 string, like, you can't get a short scaled 8 string. You know what I mean? Nor would it probably work for you, because either the strings would have to be so thick that you wouldn't be able to do anything with it anyway, to just sound like mud, or B, if you could put good, lighter strings on it, it would just be so flubby that it just wouldn't sound good. So with an 8 string, anything under 27-inch, you probably shouldn't even bother looking at, because you're not going to have quite the right tension on it. But for an 8 string, I would only look at fan fret guitars, which is a whole other issue of learning how to play. Whether you like the look of them is not the issue, but the fan fret, I think, solves the tension issues on the 8 string. What the 7 string can get away with is that you can have a 26.5-inch scale length on a 7 string and still have even tension on the low B and the high E string, relatively the same. Where on the 8 strings, it seemed like you don't have enough tension on the low F sharp and the B, and you have too much tension on the high B and the E. And then everything in between is kind of normal. So it just kind of makes the playing experience, a bit bizarre, and you have to work a little harder. So I'm not trying to turn people off of playing the 8 string. I'm just saying there's things you're going to have to live with. That said, if these guitars are so hard to play, why is anybody playing them? Well, here's the problem I have playing the 8 string for about 2 years now, and having this for a little over a year in a bit, right? it'll be 2 years in March with the 7 string, is that especially when you get your distortions right and you get the Kongzilla sound and you're shaking the building, whatever, peeling the paint off the walls, you get those angry dinosaur sounds. Uh, it's intoxicating to hear that. It really is. And on top of that, you also feel it, right? And that's something you don't get with a regular scale length guitars. You don't quite get those. Like like when you get a really drop like your 6 string guitar in either drop C or drop D or something like that, it sounds really heavy, sounds really good. Well, these things in standard tuning give you like the punchiness of the drop C in standard tuning. You just and if you drop tune them at all, like I mean, again, you knock the building off the foundation, and it kind of gives you the natural low end that you try to artificially get with these shorter scale length guitars, by adding bass and stuff like that. So these things, you got so much extra low end, you can actually pull a lot more low end away to keep the clarity, but it's already naturally punchy. It's already naturally heavy. And what happens is when you start songwriting, right? You play a riff on this. If you're not going for the classic, like for classic rock, these extended range guitars don't quite work for classic rock. They're too dark, they're too muddy, they're too heavy, right? But for metal, for metal, you just can't beat them. So, like if you had a band where you had your lead guitar player play a regular scale length guitar, whatever his choice would be, and then had your rhythm